Now, the BuckeyeXtra podcast with Joey Kaufman and Rob Oller from the Columbus Dispatch.
Welcome back, listeners, to the BuckeyeXtra football podcast. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Rob Oller. Spring football practice is around the corner. The Buckeyes will be back on the practice field Tuesday, March 10th, and we'll get to see a portion of the first two practices coming up. And Rob, are you looking forward to seeing some live football? We haven't seen the Buckeyes in helmets in 2 months.
Yeah, and they'll have those goofy cushioned helmets. What are they called?
The Guardian caps.
The Guardian caps, which are a good thing, prevent or help cut down on concussions and head trauma. But it's still a little weird to see those, mushroom helmets. Yeah, I think an interesting year. We've already covered, the big story, I think, is the schedule. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on that. But entering the season, I think the minefield that is this year's schedule is the story. So I'm curious to see what they have to say about that. And also just curious to see Julian saying how he's grown, if he's grown. I assume he has as a quarterback. I mean, let's face it, Joey, it didn't seem like he needed a whole lot of growth through the most of the regular season because they played such rum-dums. And then in the playoff, he looked like a first-year starter because he just didn't look as comfortable. So it's like, how do you judge that? How do you gauge something when the regular season is kind of like, Now they have Texas, but they're just going to hit tougher games in the regular season earlier. So I guess that's the answer. Why? So if you're asking me, my real blueprint question marks are how Sayan fits into that tougher schedule and whether we see a big difference in him in terms of poise and protection, all those things that basically, bit him in the rear against Indiana and Miami.
Yeah, it's still remarkable. Ohio State allowed 6 sacks all regular season, and Sayan was sacked 5 times in each of the 2 losses to Indiana and Miami to end the year, and just I think really was in a difficult spot with all that pressure, and also held on to the ball longer in some of those circumstances. The game against Indiana, he had his longest time to throw of any game all season, and for somebody who was so good all regular season, seemed like kind of hit a little bit of a freshman wall there toward the end. But he was young. He was a redshirt freshman. This is now going to be a little bit of a different offseason for Ohio State, where the last couple times we were here ready to begin talking about spring practice, we were talking about a quarterback competition. It was either Sayan against Lincoln Kienholz. The year before that, it was Will Howard, the new transfer, probably going to start, but still had to defend off Devin Brown. And then the year before that, it was Devin Brown trying to wrestle that job away from Kyle McCord. This is the first time since 2022 that Ohio State has a returning starting quarterback. And it's really only happened once in the Day Area where you've had a returning starting quarterback go through all of spring practice, because Justin Fields was a returning starter in 2020, but that was cut short by the COVID-19 pandemic. So they only had a week of spring ball 6 years ago. So Sayan's going to have the full benefit of a traditional offseason, and we've only really seen that from C.J. Stroud, and that's the only really precedent in the Day Area where you've had a second-year guy go through a full offseason, full regular season. And Stroud had a great redshirt freshman season in 21, and I kind of think of that as a sort of the comparable for Sayan, where you have this really good foundational spot. And what Stroud, I think, showed a lot in his second year as a starter was an ability to elevate in some of the bigger games. Obviously, they lost to Georgia in that semifinal, but he played as well as you could have played and left it all out of there in the field. And that's really, I think, what you want to see from Julian Sayan in year 2, where I don't think he was necessarily the reason they lost, to Indiana and Miami? Totally. There were a lot of other factors that contributed to their demise ultimately, but did he do everything he could have to elevate and put Ohio State in a position to win those games? Perhaps less so, and that's what you want to see, I think, from him, sort of more analogous to what CJ did in 22.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm also curious, he's lost Carnell Tate. And Carnell Tate was a huge, I'm not going to say security blanket, uh, because there was also Jeremiah Smith and he had some other weapons, but Carnell Tate was, the guy's going to be probably he's definitely a first rounder. He could be a top 10, top
Yeah.
15 pick. And so who fills in there as we enter into spring ball? Like there's some candidates, and then tight end too. Yeah, they've got some guys, but Max Clare, was sort of a coming over from Purdue, and so, it's just like there's a little more unknown. Even though you know more about the quarterback and you know more about the tailback, you feel pretty good about Bo Jackson. Um, there's still some unknowns, including the offensive line, which I know everyone's back. I always joking with people that talk about the Buckeyes. It's like, what do you think of the line? I said, well, the good news is, almost everyone's back. The bad news is almost everyone's back. If you base that on just the last two games and those 5 sacks allowed, if that's the offensive line that you're going to see this year, problems. If the offensive line that was, came to play against Michigan, which was maybe the best performance by the line, it was up there, then you're in decent shape. And they should be better. They're a year older, so the line shouldn't be too much of a problem. And to your point, I think you're right. It wasn't just the line in those last 2 games. Julian Saint kind of held the ball and looked a little flummoxed at times, held the ball too long. But that would be where I'd look. And I like the Carnell Tate. Who's stepping in this spring, Joey? Who's the next Carnell Tate?
And that's the question mark. Who's going to be really Ohio State's number 2 receiver opposite Jeremiah Smith? You do have Brandon Inniss returning in the slot, but outside of those 2 guys, you have next to no returning production at wide receiver. Part of that was them just using a very tight receiver rotation under Brian Hartline. You have some options this spring. We'll get to sort of size up who could be that opposite outside receiver across from Jeremiah Smith. And it probably starts with Chris Henry Jr., the talented, top-ranked wide receiver recruit who Ohio State held on to at the last minute despite losing Hartline to South Florida. They kept him as part of the recruiting class. He'll go through spring practice, and how does he look? Is he somebody who can immediately be a guy opposite Jeremiah Smith who can play right away as a freshman and start, even if he's not? I think the expectations of for him will be interesting, because I don't think he has to necessarily be a wide receiver in his first year where he's as good as Jeremiah. That was a unique situation. But Garrett Wilson had a very nice freshman season in 2019. He didn't start, but if you could kind of even just give Ohio State that, I think that would go a long way in terms of giving them a nice compliment outside. On the other side with Jeremiah, Garrett Wilson had 30 catches for 400 plus yards, 5 touchdowns his freshman year. So if you could be somebody who catches 40 balls, that would be, I think, maybe a fair baseline. Jeremiah Smith's freshman year was 76 catches for 1,300 receiving yards and 15 touchdowns. That's a pretty high mark to hit. But maybe if you could be sort of Garrett Wilson plus, that would satisfy or help Ohio State out a bit. They did add Devin McEwen, a transfer from UTSA. His profile is somebody who he played a lot on the outside at the G6 level, but he's only a touch over 6 feet, so his body size is a little more typical for a slot receiver, maybe at the power 4 level. But he does play outside and got a lot of speed, so in production, maybe that would be an option as well. If Chris Henry Jr. they don't quite feel as ready, you could try to move Brandon Inniss to the outside as well. You did bring in Kyle Parker, a transfer from LSU, who then could slide into the slot for Inniss. So you have some options, but if you want a bigger receiver outside as sort of the Jeremiah Smith complement, that would most likely be Chris Henry Jr.
Yeah, I like the way you think there. They basically need a threat. They need a threat, a legitimate threat, not just some decoy out there to take pressure off Jeremiah Smith. They need a guy. I think you're right on. Anywhere between 30 and 40 plus catches would be would be pretty strong. And that's where this off season is going to be huge, when they practice. With Julian saying, is he throwing to Chris Henry? How much is he throwing to Chris Henry Jr.? And once spring ball comes, and I think we'll learn fairly soon how this is going to shake out, at least with the receivers.
And the other thing to keep in mind too is I suppose they could rotate more than they have under Brian Hartline, where he really the three who were starting was really kind of where what they stuck with. They didn't really deviate too much from that.
Well, until they had to, right?
Well, even when they had to late in the season, they really didn't. Even when Jeremiah
No.
and Darnell Tate were out, they were still in a lot of 12 personnel, and you didn't really see them with a full complement of three wide receivers, where they were not really going deep into the rotation all that much. And it's probably one of the reasons why Mylan Graham is now at Notre Dame.
What do you think Ryan Day learned from last season, maybe particularly late in the season? They had some of the fewest offensive plays, right? In football. Are they going to you think they're going to re-examine that as spring comes in?
Well,
Like
it'll be
maybe.
interesting if he reflects on that at all, because I think at least in the Ohio State ecosystem, the thought was that the slow pace kind of caught up to him, and I've sort of been of that thought as well. But you look at the other teams that played for the title, Indiana and Miami were also among the slowest paced teams. So there might be something to the slower pace. There could be some value in it. And obviously helped Ohio State in the year before. So maybe they pick it up a little bit, but I would not expect them to drastically change all that much from it, because it does seem that the way it has gone for a lot of the top contenders in the sport in recent years. And if anything, your depth is not going to really be much better where you can have this truly deep rotation. I mean, you lost 30 guys to the transfer portal, and they did replace a lot of them, but you're not going to totally just stack a position group the way you could have maybe 5 years ago. So it'll be interesting if Day is reflective at all upon just the pace that they went through last year. Maybe he felt that was the right strategy. They just need to execute in those situations, which I think is there's certainly, I think it's valid if Julian Sain is able to sneak it a little better in the fourth quarter or third quarter against Indiana, and he maybe hits Bo Jackson on that fourth down as well in the flat or third down. Maybe if they connect on those, it's a different story, and you're not as hung up on the pace of play. So they either need to pick it up or be more effective and more efficient in the times where they really need a first down or 6 points in those high leverage spots.
What else are you looking for as spring ball?
Well, you touched on the line, and I think that's another one too. Is it didn't end all that well, but they had a good regular season, and they're hanging with a lot of those starters. They only lost Tegra Shabola at right guard. They could make a very seamless switch and just plug in Gabe Van Sickle or Joshua Padilla at that right guard spot, or you could decide that more tinkering is needed, and maybe you move Austin Searville back to guard. He started about half the year in 24 at left guard, and they moved him out to left tackle last year. Maybe you bring him back inside, or you move Philip Daniels, the right tackle, to inside. They have Ian Moore, who I think showed some promising moments last year as a redshirt freshman when he started for Daniels at Purdue and then filled in the second half against Miami, was actually pretty stabilizing when they put him in the game against the Hurricanes in that playoff quarterfinal. So I think a lot of it will depend. Ian Moore is probably an interesting name to watch this spring practice, because if they feel he is ready to start, they will probably push one of the tackles inside to clear space for him. Or if they feel they'd rather go with Josh Padilla or Van Sickle. Padilla is the oldest of the bunch, but Ian Moore is a big tackle, 6'6", over 300 pounds. So they might try to make a spot for him. And Cedarville is probably his size is probably more natural for a guard, but actually it held up pretty well in pass protection last year. And it's still 6'5" and over 300 as well. So that's they can reconfigure some things a little bit, and they might even do some more in fall camp, because we've seen some times where they really they show one thing in spring and then it comes to fall camp and it looks totally different.
Yeah.
But I remember a couple years ago when I think it was about the 21 season, where they came out with Thayer Munford and moved inside to clear some space for DeJuan Jones out at the tackle spot, where they had to get him on the field, so they moved one of the tackles inside. So that it tends to hinge on one or two guys, where Ohio State is typically, their philosophy has been, you want to get the 5 offensive linemen on the field no matter what. And you look at the 4 returners, you expect those will be among the 5, and who's the 5th new guy to the addition.
Yeah. Well, Cedarville, I think, is the best talent. So where is he best? Where do you put him to be best positioned, I would say. Talked about Bo Jackson, so I think they're okay there. I don't know about their depth. It seemed like last year they had better depth, but it did, Peoples just didn't, everyone raved about him in spring, and then by the time fall in the season, he had fallen to third, fourth string. And so I don't know what you're looking at here. Like, they got some depth. It's usually not a problem area for Ohio State, is in the backfield.
No, we're going to see some of the depth in spring, because Turbo or Isaiah West and both Bo Jackson are expected to be out because they're recovering from some shoulder surgeries, and then we'll see some other guys. I think Turbo Rogers would be somebody who's interesting to watch. He was the other freshman running back they brought in last year, but he was out with an injury last season, so we never really got to see him much. Legend Bay, they were ultimately able to sign. He's somebody who'll factor in. Those are 2 younger guys. Jacoby Jackson was a transfer they brought in from Florida. So you'll see some of those newer faces who maybe won't be
That's
either
all name team there with some of those. Legend and it was Turbo.
Turbo, that's his nickname. Anthony
Right.
Rogers.
Does he go by Turbo?
Turbo Rogers.
That's the question. I think he might.
So you better be fast if you go by Turbo.
Yeah, you better be. Tight end. Again, they lost two pillars, Kaczmarek and yeah.
No more Will Kaczmarek, no more Max Clare.
Max Clare, right?
And they lose Jelani Thurman to North Carolina. So they were hit hard at that spot, but they added some players. Mason Williams, a transfer from Ohio, he sort of he sort of has a similar career trajectory as Kaczmarek. Starts off at Ohio U and then comes up to Ohio State. Hunter Welsing is the other one. I think it was probably one of their best transfer pickups, a tight end from Northwestern who was an honorable All Big Ten selection last year and really a late bloomer. He's a 7th-year senior. He will, I think, certainly be in contention to start. And that's an interesting position group too, as well, because they were certainly not reluctant as well last year to use heavy personnel at times, putting 2 or 3 tight ends on the field. And you probably have the numbers to do it again this year. Bennett Christian does return. You have Nate Roberts as well, who is primarily a fullback, but is a sort of a tight end by trade. And you have those 2 returners with both the 2 transfer pickups. You're going to be able to do it. And they've gone in that direction of being a little more heavier personnel heavy. And you're bringing in Arthur Smith, who has a reputation as an offensive coordinator for not being shy about using some bigger people at tight end to help you out up front. So that's the direction Ohio State continues to go in. they are going to have some options, and we'll get to sort of size them up as well. Hunter Wilson kind of moves well. He's an interesting career guy where he he did not have more than a catch in his career until the last 2 years. So it really sort of beset by injuries early in his career at Northwestern, and has come along in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I don't think the offensive side of the ball is where the issues are. It's switching over. If there's a red flag, it's going to be defense just because they lost so much. Where they're going to let five, how many?
You lose eight.
Five of the five first round guys they'll have. Let me see. Downs, Sonny, uh, who am I missing?
You lose 8 guys again because you only have 3 return.
Yeah.
You have really only 3 full-time returning starters on defense. Kenyatta Jackson, the defensive end, Jermaine Matthews, and Jalen McClain, the secondary.
Okay, there you go.
Edric Houston was a part-time starter at defensive tackle. Tywan Malone was more of the played more overall, though, and he's gone to the NFL. So you're again, this is a situation where Ohio State loses 8 of its 11 starters on defense. The saving grace for them last year was you had Caleb Downs back, who was arguably the best defensive player in college football last year, and you had Sonny Styles, who turned out to be a top 10 pick. So do you feel?
And Bignoson, who doesn't, who had his best year. I mean, that may be an underrated loss.
Right, because I think he's probably a day 2 pick in the draft. And that's the thing with this defensive challenge. They lost a lot of guys last year, but of those 8 defensive starters they lost, only 2 of them were actually picked before day 3 of the draft. So they were veterans. They were very good players, certainly for Ohio State, led them to the national championship. But in terms of just pure talent and NFL talent, this year's class is better because they're going to have 3 guys who are likely to go, or have a very good chance to go in the top 10 between Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, and Caleb Downs. And then Caden McDonald is probably going to go in late first round or early second round.
Right.
So it's high end. You were losing 8 starters again, and you were losing even more high end talent of those 8 guys. So I think it really underscores the challenge this year. Can they find sort of the playmakers? And we didn't expect Arvell Reese to be a potential top 5 pick. We were talking this time last year. And so at Ohio State, there's always, how do you replace this guy? Then somebody else comes along who's also great. So sometimes these can be a little bit overthought because there's probably somebody great waiting in the wings, but you still want to see for Ohio State some of those maybe start to emerge this time of year.
Yeah, not everything is like combine numbers. Obviously, Sonny and Arvell had great numbers, but so did Lorenzo Styles, who had like the second fastest 40 time, and yet as a player for the Buckeyes he was okay. But he didn't really open a lot of eyes. He didn't flash a ton last year for Ohio State. So sometimes guys just who you don't think have the incredible numbers will step forward. I'm thinking of Curry, right? Kane Curry. I mean, you knew he was good, but he had a really good year, and I don't think anybody would say, oh, this guy was a combine phenom. So yeah, if you're Ohio State, you're kind of hoping that some guys kind of step forward, as Arvell Reese did, and kind of surprise you, who aren't necessarily the like physical specimens, but are football players, for lack of a better term. And they did hit the portal, for some important pieces there.
Yeah, this is where I think the portal evaluations are really going to have to hit for them, because they're going to the portal with the intention of really being able to bring in starters at both levels of 2 out of 3 levels of the defense, maybe even all 3 levels, where on the defensive line, you're hoping James Smith and John Walker, 2 defensive tackles they brought in, can be in the mix to start with Edric Houston. James Smith came from Alabama, John Walker from UCF, and was somebody Ohio State recruited at a high school before he ended up staying in Florida and playing there for them. And one of them will at least probably need to start with Edric Houston. And then in the secondary, you're bringing in Earl Jr. from Florida State, Terry Moore from Duke. Both of those guys are going to be relied on, likely to start at safety spots. You're bringing in Dominic Kelly from Georgia to compete with Devin Sanchez for that other cornerback spot. I would expect Sanchez would certainly be the favorite to win that job, a former five-star recruit who was their top backup corner last year. But you need those guys to hit because you're replacing Caleb Downs, you're replacing Caden McDonald. Linebacker is a spot where they do, I think, probably have the most promising returning starters in terms of where you can maybe project them on the depth chart. Peyton Pierce and Riley Pettijohn. But you did bring in Christian Allegro from Wisconsin, who was an honorable mention All Big Ten selection last year. Maybe he pushes one of them for a starting spot as well. Maybe he starts, maybe they rotate. So, but certainly if those guys need a hit because they're going to be relied upon to play heavy snaps.
You know what I find interesting about the whole portal deal is that when you recruit out of high school, like a guy's a freshman or even a sophomore, you're saying, hey, he can make the jump. You know, when you're recruiting upperclassmen, they kind of are what they are. You know what they are. There might be less room for improvement. I'm thinking of the kid they brought in from North Carolina, who, linebacker, right? D end.
Bo Atkinson, defensive end.
Yeah, Bo Atkinson. So, you know, we're not really going to sit here and say, is Bo Atkinson going to make the jump? Well, he made the jump when he was at North Carolina. Now, that's not to say he can't improve and be developed, maybe better here than he was there. I don't know. But I just think that's an interesting piece of the portal versus recruit thing. Like you said, you bring guys in, they have to play right away. I mean, you know what you're getting. And this isn't like, well, we hope he develops into something. You wouldn't go to the portal for somebody who has potential, I guess is what I'm saying, typically.
I mean, you can because somebody like Dominic Kelly, who brought in from Georgia, who was only a freshman there. So he's got 3 years of eligibility left. Somebody with upside, maybe you don't really factor him in to start right away, but you think he figures maybe into your long-term plans a little more. But some of the guys Ohio State has brought in, they only have 1 year of eligibility left. They made an effort to go after some veterans with starting experience and
The Indiana format, right?
right. And
Get older.
Gary Moore, Earl Little Jr., John Walker, James Smith, all those guys are 4th-year guys. I think Walker maybe has 2 years. Walker has 2 years of eligibility left because of an injury. But a lot of those guys, this is their last year. Allegro from Wisconsin, like they are here to play 1 year, and so you need them to be good and factor into your rotation right away. There's no saving them for down the line. This is
Right.
when you need them to be major contributors and starters and difference makers because
Yeah. Yeah. So you put all this together, and we didn't go through and kind of rate each position 0 to 5 or anything like that. But on a whole, if you take the entire team, I'd say if last year it was a 5 out of 5 or a 4.5 out of 5, this team I'm thinking is a 3.5 or 4. Or if you believe last year's team was a 5 out of 5 overall, then this team, I think, being realistic, maybe the best it could be on paper at least is 4.5, and you're probably looking at more like a 4. How much difference does that make? I'm saying not so much potential, but production. I don't know. How do you see it? It's hard for me to sit here and say this team is going to be as good, regardless of schedule. And yet you do have the most important position on the team having a year under his belt in Julian Sands. So you would expect him to be better. And that's not nothing.
right.
I don't know. I just think that overall, and then you throw the schedule into that mix, and even Buckeye Nation, and people I've talked to and heard through emails and that are like, you know what, 2 losses 3 losses, the real pessimists are 4 losses. I'm not saying that's totally unrealistic, but I don't think there's an expectation as much there's always expectation, as much expectation going into the spring that this is going to be, vying for the national championship. Obviously, that's always the goal, and there is a certain amount of expectation, and that happens every year. But I just think that the fan base is probably going to cool its jets a little bit in terms of what they anticipate happening. Now, I say that knowing that once fall arrives, all bets off, and we're going to win it all, and we should win it all. So, I don't know your thoughts on that. Your
No,
overall view of this team.
I think the pressure is higher this year than last year. Because last year you just won the national championship, and I think there was a certain grace period. And this is now the last year of Jeremiah Smith, possibly the last year of Julian Sand. And
Interesting.
that, I think there's an opportunity. You have a historically great wide receiver, Heisman Trophy quarterback finalist, that you owe it to really maximize their careers. So with an experienced offensive line that's much older, you have guys like Hinsman, who's a fifth-year guy, and Cerevel's a fourth-year guy. Luke Montgomery's a fourth-year guy. I mean, that should be better protection for a quarterback. You have a generational receiver talent who's going to be a top 3 pick, top 5 pick. You owe it to them so I think that factor in the fact that it's been over a year since they've last won a national championship.
Yeah.
They had the early exit in the playoff. I don't think people are going to expect in terms of the regular season where it's I don't think it's expected to go 12-0 or an undefeated season, but I think certainly people with fans would expect you to be in the playoff and have a very good shot to win it all and win a national championship and be in the semifinals at the very least pushing for a national championship. I mean, you have such a great quarterback receiver tandem that you can't waste that. And especially with the new offensive coordinator, you don't have to be a generational defense with the talent you have on offense. So even if they don't allow less than 10 points a game, maybe they allow 14 points a game, it's okay. Your offense might be better. It should be better. So I think that's I think part of the expectation setting for this team is you don't want to waste a good quarterback and receiver. And I think it's Ohio State too. The national championship window is always open because you're going to have another great young quarterback probably succeed Julian Sand. So that's a consideration as well. But this is a special quarterback receiver tandem that you don't want to waste.
Yeah, that's fair.
It makes it sound like to me, like more I think about this is a big offseason for Julian Sand, because if you are going to make the case that Ohio State is going to be better in 26, a lot of it comes down to his development this offseason, his ability to elevate in bigger games and be somebody who can truly lift a team like a franchise quarterback.
Well, you said it, bigger games. And they're going to get an opportunity in bigger games. So that probably will help him. I mean, you're not blowing through a regular season where Penn State was a disappointment and you didn't play Indiana and you didn't play Oregon. You did play Michigan. You finally got over the hump there. And then you get kind of like, slapped around in that Big Ten championship game by the Hoosiers. This time you're going to have Oregon. You got to go out to USC. You'll, of course, still have Michigan. You go to Indiana. So he's going to have an opportunity to see some big time opponents before the playoff even arrives. Now, the question is, you got to come out on top on the majority of those, because I'm not sure 3 losses in the regular season, not counting any Big Ten championship game, gets you in the playoff. Alabama got in last year, the first with 3 losses, but 1 was in the title game. So and I think the committee shows that losses in title games are not, at least last year, they changed the rules. They move the goalposts all the time. That a loss in a Big Ten in a conference championship game is not that damaging. But if you have 3 in the regular season, Oh, we forgot. There's Texas too. I mean, he comes right out of the chute. What week? That's a little later, right? Was it week 3,
Week 2.
4? Oh, it is week 2. Okay. Yeah, can't keep it straight. But anyhow, the point being that he will be battle tested. You just got to win the majority, more of those battles than you lose to even get to the playoff. I mean, I'm not going to be this sky is falling person here and say, well, they're not going to make the playoff. But I feel fairly comfortable saying that if they lose 3 regular season games, depending what happens around the country, while they're still at a 12-game playoff, not a 16, a different story if it's 16, but at 12, you're on thin ice there. So that's why this regular season, as we enter spring, I mean, full circle, that the schedule to me is the story.
We'll see if they're ready. Here's the other thing too about this year, and with I want to say this on Julian saying, but in some ways it's going to be a little bit of a referendum on the way Ohio State manages the quarterback position because other schools, Indiana's done this again, where they pluck top senior transfer quarterback. Last year's Fernando Mendoza. This year it's Josh Hoover from TCU, and they plug him atop the depth chart. They don't sit around for a couple years and develop somebody. But the argument for developing somebody is you have your chance to Ryan Day has a chance to sort of put his imprint on a young quarterback, and maybe you take a little bit of your lumps in the postseason as he did last year, but there's supposed to be a payoff down the line for that. You're maybe a little bit of a sacrifice instead of having a more veteran established starter. I think now is a chance to sort of enhance and have that big second year where you can have by developing a guy. So Ohio State, that's their preferred model. They brought in Will Howard in 24, but typically they've brought somebody along. And I know Julian Saint transferred from Alabama, but all effectively he's been brought up in the Ohio State system since he was a true freshman. They're on track to do it again with Tavian St. Clair after saying. So how does it work this year? Is there a payoff for Ohio State, or do they end up missing the window by having not brought in somebody experienced? So it'll be, I think, there's a chance for them to kind of benefit from the way they've gone about developing quarterbacks, and we'll see if it ultimately bears fruit.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. We'll find out. I mean, they won it all with Will Howard.
Yeah.
And you wonder if Ryan Day's just a guy that likes to develop young quarterbacks into, he just loves that process of taking a younger guy and developing him instead of bringing a guy in. I mean, coaches are human too. They have their
Yeah.
things they like and don't like and they prefer. Now winning is the ultimate, but they think they can develop and win, and maybe they can. I mean, they didn't win. They never won a national title with CJ. They didn't win it with Fields. They won it with Will Howard. My Miami got to the title game with a seasoned guy, and Indiana won it with a seasoned guy. So, it's a copycat, just like the NFL. College is copycat. Whatever the trend is, the hot trend, everyone seems to go that way. And this idea of performance over potential is the new like hot buzz phrase. It's like we're looking at bringing in older guys who have proven themselves, who bring a lot to the locker room, calm. Yeah, it's kind of like we'll see how this works out for Ohio State, and we find out here just in about a week. It all begins.
Yeah. Last two national championship winning quarterbacks were transfer quarterbacks, and in guys in their last year of eligibility.
Mm. There you have it. I guess trend.
But
What's the trend? Does it take 3 seasons
I
for a
think
trend? 4?
that's for I think journalists like to use 3 as the trend. 2, not quite enough yet.
Right.
But if
So
it's something
who's
like
so who's out so who's out there? I don't know what teams are out there other than Indiana brought in a guy from
Texas would
TC.
be traditional quarterback development with Arch Manning.
Right.
Brought him in his high
Texas.
school, sat 2 years, started 2 years.
Yeah. Texas would be the other side would be, Indiana's going to try to do it again with a kid they brought in from TCU, probably the best quarterback in Arguably the best quarterback in the portal.
Oregon's a situation where they have a transfer quarterback, but kind of a little bit in between the two, where they brought in
Yeah.
Dante Moore as a transfer for UCLA, but he actually sat a year behind Gabriel and then started last year. Then this is his second year. So that's sort of in between a little bit, but rather than sort of your 1 year rental, which is how Indiana and Ohio State did it, last two national champions.
Yeah. It all begins again. Thank you, Joey.
Thank you, Rob. We're signing off on the podcast. We will be back in your podcast feeds a little more frequently over the next month or so as spring practice picks up. Thanks for downloading, listening. Hope you enjoyed the show.